This is Just Block, and if you haven't been living under a rock recently, you've probably heard of Project L. This fighting game being developed by a little indie studio, Riot Games. There's been a lot of hype building around this game recently, and I for one cannot wait for it. Recently, the fighting game scene has been exploding with popularity, with major releases like Street Fighter 6, Mortal Kombat 1, and even Tekken 8 on the way. However, I think the growth of the community is somewhat limited by complex mechanics and a steep barrier of entry to just being able to do everything in the game. This makes it an easy pass for anyone who isn't a diehard fan of the genre. Project L may just be the first game to cut through all of this icky film that sits on top of the fighting game genre. This is why Project L will be the biggest fighting game in history. Now, I know people love to say this for whatever the new hotness is, like the release of Guilty Gear Strive and even the massive success of Street Fighter 6. I, for one, am exactly one of those people. But hear me out. Project L is being developed by Riot Games, and unlike I may have led you to believe, they're in fact a colossal titan in the gaming industry. They're responsible for the absolute juggernaut that is League of Legends. If you've played League of Legends for more than 2 seconds, I'm sure you've been called every slur known to man. The type of shit that would make the Xbox Live party chat say, "Hey man, that was kinda too far." Regardless, League of Legends has managed to hold strong for over 10 years as the biggest esport in the scene. This year's Worlds having a prize pool of a staggering $2.2 million. League of Legends towers over every other MOBA in its path, making games like Heroes of the Storm forced to sit at the peanut allergy table. This game has more than 2.4 million active users and is only one of Riot's massive titles. Also boasting the massively successful team shooter Valorant, as well as the slightly less successful Legends of Runeterra, but we don't talk about Runeterra. Not to mention the Netflix hit show Arcane, the amount of people who are paying attention to this property is absolutely monstrous, and a portion of those people will go and check out the next thing that Riot Games is working on. This company also has the Scrooge McDuck-sized pile of cash to absolutely pour into this game and make it spew out the sides with KDA skins that'll have the fans going, "I just really like the design of this one." Okay, buddy, go touch grass and get back to me about that. But I digress. Riot Games doesn't just have the shmoney to do it, but they have also handpicked two of the most influential people to come out of the fighting game community. Tom and Tony Cannon are the founders of the biggest, most iconic tournament in the world, Evolutions. They're also the creators of Rollback Netcode, which I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been a hot button topic in the fighting game community for a brick. These guys are basically the mastermind of the fighting game community, pulling the strings behind the curtain. They were also previously developing a smaller title, Rising Thunder, which was a very forward-thinking fighting game in its own right, having no special move inputs at all and giving you access to your strongest moves with one button press. The downside being that it was tied to a cooldown. Ew, cooldowns in fighting games? Not a terrible idea, but These new and innovative ideas are what made them an obvious choice for developing Project L. Riot Games essentially used their massive influence to pluck them out of developing their own game and told them, what if you made that League of Legends instead? So Riot Games has a massive amount of people looking at them to see what they're going to do next. They have a crazy amount of money in their pocket ready to make this game whatever it needs, and they have the perfect design team that knows the ins and outs of fighting games to make a really well-designed fighting game. So what are they going to do to make this more accessible and more playable to the average player? Whenever you try to get one of your unindoctrinated friends to try a fighting game, what do they always say? "Oh, the controls are too hard. I don't want to watch a 30-minute cutscene whenever I get hit with nothing to do about it." I would, but $60 is kind of steep to try it out. Project L is fixing all of that. The main goal of this game is to blow up and act like they don't know nobody. But secondarily to that is to remove barriers of entry in the fighting game genre to allow any player to try it and immediately start doing cool anime shit to their friends. They've made a point to make this game free to play. This has been a staple of the Riot Games business model for a while, but it seems perfectly fitting for a fighting game. Few games in the fighting game sphere have dipped their toe into these waters. Some like Brawlhalla and Killer Instinct have experienced success with this business model. Recently launched Grand Blue Fantasy vs. Rising also appears to be doing well, following the same lead. I believe free-to-play is the way of the future for fighting games. With a massive roster of characters, there's plenty of fuel to make skin after skin that'll have the Zoomers grabbing their mom's credit card to buy the new Yasuo skin that turns them into Travis Scott from Fortnite. It's a tried and true monetization scheme that Riot has proven works with games like Valorant and League of Legends. So, they've solved how to get anyone to try their game, but how do we get those glue-eating, I can't do a quarter circle fellas to like this game? Simple really, they took all that shit out. They've gone for a control scheme similar to something like Smash Brothers. You hold a direction and hit a button to get different versions of normals and special moves. Buttons link into each other fluidly with a chain system reminiscent of anime games like Guilty Gear or Melty Blood. I just heard all the gray-haired geezers in the community cry out, "No, the game is gonna be too simple. They're taking away all the depth." First of all, shut up.
Anyway, shut the fuck up, bitch. Go to Reddit or some shit with that attitude. Beat it.
Go back to your corner and play some Third Strike, alright? Secondly, games with simple controls can absolutely have depth. Alright, here, let me explain it to people who don't like change. A large part of the reason special moves were always constructed with a motion input is to balance the power of a given special move. There needs to be a delay between when you need the move and how fast you can make it come out. For example, if an invincible dragon punch could be input with one button and spammed like crazy, we'd have some problems. I'm looking at you, Modern Controls Luke players. However, if a game is balanced top to bottom with this in mind, it can work around a lot of these issues. For example, as far as invincible reversal moves, there isn't much of that in Project L at all. As far as we've seen, the only move to work like that is Darius's Armored Axe Swing, which isn't fully invincible, it just has armor, which means that it can take a few moves before being cancelled. With proper care and consideration, the system can absolutely be balanced around simple inputs for special moves. You just have to actually balance the move, and that's kinda hard for most developers. The game is also a tag fighter, which means that every match has two characters, a point character and a character to use as an assist until the time is right to switch them out. This in itself adds a whole heap of depth that will leave people labbing setups and combinations forever. Games like Marvel vs. Capcom and Dragon Ball FighterZ have really shown the potential for how far the system can go. These games are still being figured out and new stuff brought into the fold to this day. Is it really such a bad thing if the fundamental aspect of the game are accessible to every player? Why is it that every person who walks into a fighting game can't anti-air to save their life? Because the concept is hard enough on its own. There doesn't need to be an artificial layer of difficulty placed on top of something that is inherently difficult. Fighting games' core complexity comes from the fact that you have to juggle multiple concepts in your head and manage to hold all of them up at the same time. You have to space appropriately and punish your opponent's mistakes and anti-air on the right timing and have the input correct for when you do and remember the combo and the setup after the combo and keep track of the meters and God! You see the point. The depth and creativity of gameplay comes from the decision making and the variety of tools you have for different situations. It's not coming from a little squiggity squoogity you have the input to get your Kamehameha to come out. Alright, for example, let's look at a character like Echo. His core mechanic is rewind. He sets a rewind point with a clone. After doing certain special moves, he can either recall to it or choose to not do it at all. This leads to combo variety and setups with crazy left-right mix-up depending on whether you take the clone or not. We can already see personality coming out in gameplay from developers like Clockwork, showing off incredible tech, and the game isn't even out yet. All of this being made in a system that has very little in the way of technical inputs. I will say, execution-heavy concepts serve a place in fighting games. They provide something to strive for, and something to distinguish the truly high-level gameplay from Little Jimmy on his Xbox controller. I agree that there should still remain an amount of advanced techniques to allow people to have that journey to mastery. But also, I think it's important that the basic mechanics and core components be accessible the very first time someone touches a controller. It's way too easy for people to hit a wall the first time they're trying out a fighting game and decide it's not for them at all. The other most important elements to help retain new players are educational systems like tutorials and training modes. Not only should it be accessible to pick up and do everything, but there should be an obvious road to learn more about the game. Modern fighting games are starting to get very good at this. Mortal Kombat 1's tutorial is a perfect example of how to do it. This approach puts you in the situation where a certain mechanic comes up and freezes time when there's a thing to do. This forces you to feel in your hands how to do the thing and also teaches you what to look for and why that matters in the first place. If the goal of the game is to open up the door for non-fighting game players, a highly advanced and comprehensive tutorial is an absolute necessity. We haven't heard anything from the Project L team about educational resources in the game, but I'm sure Tom and Tony Cannon have a plan for that. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, Riot Games has the resources, the ingenious development team, and monetization strategy to make a game that lasts forever, and forces other developers to make some changes themselves. Basically, if Project L doesn't slip on a banana peel and make some dumbass decisions, then it's going to smack around every modern fighting game and change the genre forever. I'm predicting that this game will spark a renaissance in the community, forcing other developers to remove barriers of entry and stop milking the players with DLC after DLC, thrusting us into the modern era of fighting games. Say goodbye to the perfect Electric Wind Godfist and say hello to your little cousin pulling out the Rolling Death Cradle the first time he touches the controller. Not really, but I do think it is very likely that simplified and accessible control schemes will become the norm, and maybe NetherRealm Studio will stop charging you for your firstborn son every time they add Ultra Instinct Shaggy into the new combat pack. Yeah, probably not.